Hi everyone, welcome back to Mountain Call. Today I want to do another trip and budget review of a vacation that my wife and I took to South Dakota this past February. I've always wanted to see South Dakota and specifically to see the Black Hills region and the Badlands of South Dakota. So we planned a trip to see both Wind Cave and Badlands National Parks. We lived in Colorado at the time and had really just a two-day weekend that we took this trip. And we planned out a route and planned out camping for both nights. So the first night we stayed at Wind Cave, and we got on the road sort of in the mid-afternoon after my wife got off of work. And we didn't get up to Wind Cave until probably 8:30 at night. It was pitch black out, and we rolled into the campsite. It was freezing cold. I think it took us about 5.5 hours to drive from the Denver area to get to the Elk Mountain campground there at Wind Cave. And there was nobody else there, which wasn't a huge surprise. I mean, it was the middle of winter and it was probably 25 degrees outside. But that night we pulled up to a campsite and had a fire, made ourselves some dinner, and then we camped in the car, which we do occasionally when it gets that cold out, just because setting up a tent and sleeping in the tent in that kind of cold is a bit brutal. So we woke up early the next day and took a cave tour that started at the visitor center there. I believe it was the Garden of Eden cave tour of Wind Cave. It was really spectacular. I didn't really know what to expect because I've only ever been on one cave tour in my life before this, and it was really stunning, just the maze-like features of that cave. I think it's over 160 miles of passageways that have been discovered, which is the third largest in the U.S., and it's something like the seventh or eighth largest in the entire world. But what really was amazing, too, was that more and more is being discovered all the time. We don't really know yet, the explorers don't really know yet, how long that cave system might end up being. Then after our cave tour, we drove around the park for a little bit, and it was amazing, and seeing those Black Hills in the morning light was really stunning. And I was amazed by how much wildlife there was at Wind Cave National Park. So the park isn't just about the cave below ground. I mean, there's some amazing stuff above ground too. We saw bison and coyotes and antelope and bald eagles. It really was a stunning scenery there. And we went on a short hike. I think it was about a mile loop. There was a fire tower up there. You couldn't go up the fire tower, but you could go right up next to it. And that gave you a really sweeping sort of overlook of the entire park, really. So that kind of wrapped up our time at Wind Cave National Park. I would definitely go back to Wind Cave. I feel like another cave tour would be a really fun thing to do, and I would definitely go on some more hikes through that area there. And I just want to go back to the Black Hills in general because it's really beautiful. So we drove out of Wind Cave National Park and kept driving in the Black Hills, and we went through a town, Custer, and had lunch there at a restaurant, which was really fun. I mean, I think probably in the summertime it's a bit more of a tourist town, but in the wintertime there weren't any tourists, and it really felt like a small town and had a nice local vibe. After lunch in Custer, we drove out of the Black Hills and got on I-90 East and drove a couple hours to Badlands National Park. As soon as we got to Badlands National Park, we were just immediately blown away by the just bareness of the landscape, and I was really surprised at how tall some of these Badlands formations are. So we had been planning to camp at Cedar Pass Campground, which is very close to the visitor center at Badlands National Park, but we got to the campground and it was totally shut down. Like, you couldn't enter the campground, and I assume it closes down for the winter. But I didn't see any indication of that online anywhere. So that was one of those things that you kind of plan out ahead of time and it doesn't come to fruition. And then you get kind of left without a place to sleep for the night. Luckily, I had looked up another campground on the other side of Badlands National Park called Sage Creek Campground. It was about an hour and 15 minutes away, though, so as the sun was already setting, we didn't really want to have to drive that far to get to our campground, but we did it anyways, and it was actually kind of nice because we got to drive through the entire park as the sun was setting, and so we got to see all of the light reflecting off of these formations at these really, really neat angles. And it really just gave this bright orange feel to the entire landscape there. So again, that night we eventually got to the campground. Again, it was dark, but we just had dinner and slept in the car again. But actually, what was really cool is before we went to sleep, we started hearing these coyotes howling all around us. Like they had to be within a half a mile of us on all sides, really. And you could just hear them howl one after another. And I'm not really too frightened by coyotes, but it was a bit of a harrowing experience just to hear that howl in the air. So next morning we woke up and packed up the car. As soon as we rounded the corner out of the campground, we encountered a small herd of bison that were literally within 100 yards of our campsite. So that was kind of neat. We were gonna go look at the rest of the park again. I mean, we had just driven through it the night before, but we wanted to get a better feel of it rather than, in a rush to get to our campsite. But we first took a detour to Wall Drug, which, if you've ever been to South Dakota, you've surely seen billboards advertising for Wall Drug. If you don't know what it is, I'd say it's like this Western saloon type of mall, but not really a mall. It's like one shop that just leads into another shop, which leads into a gift store, which leads into a clothing store, which leads into a game room, which leads into a diner. It's really weird, but I'm glad we went, and we got some donuts and coffee at the diner there. And it was a fun experience. I mean, we had been seeing billboards up everywhere for Wall Drug, and it's one of those things you just have to stop. You just have to stop and see it. So after Wall Drug, we went back into the park, and it was actually really nice to then see the park in the morning light after having just seen it in the evening light the night before, because like I was saying, with the sun setting, you got to see this bright orange of these Badlands formations. But now you have the sun rising, and it was a much brighter feeling, and you got to see sort of different angles of the formations with light shining on them in different ways. And you really get a better perspective on just how expansive these Badlands are. They just seem to go on forever. We did go on a short 1.5 mile long hike. I can't even remember the name of it, but it was near the visitor center, the Ben Rifle Visitor Center. And it was really neat because it had this cool ladder that you had to climb up to sort of get up on top of these rocks. I would say that you don't really need to go on a hike to experience the beautiful scenery of the Badlands, but it was neat to be really in those formations, walking around within them. And the hike ended with a nice overlook of the Badlands. So I'm glad we went on that brief walk. On our way out of Badlands, we stopped at the visitor center. I bought a Badlands mug. I love these national park mugs. I really don't like gift shops in general, but every time I see one of these mugs, it's hard for me not to buy it. They're just so cool looking. So total on this trip, we spent over 17 hours driving. Honestly, it didn't really feel like 17 hours of driving because a lot of it is through really scenic country, and some of the driving is through the national parks themselves and through the Black Hills. So it was all part of the experience of going on this adventure, was the drive as well. I have to say, all of South Dakota, at least the parts of South Dakota that we saw, there's just this really magnificent feeling when you're just looking out over these landscapes and there's nothing but silence. I can't explain it. I can't describe it. You really just have to experience that sort of lonesome silence to understand the beauty in it. If I had to say which of these two national parks I liked better, I'd probably say that the Badlands National Park was the more spectacular and stunning of the two. But that being said, I think I'd be more likely to go back to Wind Cave National Park. I kind of feel like we did everything that there was to do in Badlands. At Wind Cave, I really was fascinated by the cave itself and would love to go on another tour and would love to go hiking more. And part of Wind Cave too is just that the scenery there in the mountains has so much else to do. So I would definitely take another trip back to the Black Hills and do some more adventuring there. So here's a budget breakdown of this trip. We spent about $112 in gas. This is always the biggest factor on these trips where we just get in the car and go. I mean, you just can't really get around that. Food, we packed a lot of food, packed pasta salad and sort of kielbasa and potato hash. But we also did go out for lunch the one day in Custer, and we did buy donuts and coffee at the diner at Wall Drug. So that stuff adds up, and we spent about $80 in that. We spent $16 camping at Wind Cave the one night, and then the campsite at the Badlands that we ended up going to was free, so we didn't pay any money there. And we spent about $10 on firewood just because we bought a couple packs of firewood before we went so that we could actually have fires. And then, like I said, I did buy that Badlands coffee mug, which was $25. So that also adds to your total cost for the trip. And all told, it was $243. Again, this is just an estimate, but it's not that bad. I mean, this is a pretty cheap trip if you treat it like a vacation. And $243, or if you round that up to $250, that's a really cheap vacation, no matter how you look at it. So that's it for this video. Let me know if you like this type of video. I enjoy making these videos, and I think it's nice to look at these national parks and also look at how you can take a trip to these national parks on a budget.